I think it's a very interesting discussion to have. Now, I think we need to recognise that there are real opportunities here, and particularly with the new Department of Higher and Further Education. So these things can be done across the island if the willingness is there. And obviously, in terms of third level, the access and us making access easier, that can be done in very simple ways. Some of them that were discussed in terms of the point system, the CAO system, and the system in the note. And in fairness, I do think there's a willingness there across all of the heads of the third level institutes that I have met, both in terms of the institutes of technology and the universities. There is a willingness there. And there's a real awareness there, I found, in terms of the benefits of an all-island approach to education that threatens nobody's constitutional preference. And I think if anything is to come from today, it is that. And I noted in your paper, Edgar, and I thought that this was interesting, and I always knew it was more, but that education and having a highly skilled workforce was 10 times more important than the most important infrastructure one could invest in, even in broadband. And maybe I'd ask you to speak to that for a moment. I know you're saying the broadband is really important. And again, I think there's real opportunities there in terms of having proper broadband throughout the island and the connection of the digital education across the island. Again, there's no reason why somebody in Mayo, or you mentioned Westport earlier on, couldn't be part of a project team for somebody in the north and vice versa. I maybe would ask you just to talk about the opportunities around the new technological universities, particularly in relation to the GMIT, Sligo, Letterkenny, and onto McGee there in what could be done. And I acknowledge what Stephen was saying in regard to the apprenticeships there as well. There's a new apprenticeship plan being done here, and I think that needs to incorporate over the 4-year or likely 4-year period of any apprenticeship. There's no reason whatsoever why some of that apprenticeship couldn't be done in the north as well. So maybe just on the Connacht Ulster Alliance and on the 10 times more return for investment in education.
Okay, on that one, it was a paper that originally we started out looking at broadband, but then we decided we would look at not just broadband, but education and a lot of other infrastructures. And what we looked at is firm startups, and we looked at attracting FDI. And the study is now published in the Journal of Regional Science, which is a top international journal. And this is what we found. It's that education is just so much more important. And in fact, what we also found is that broadband without high level of skills in the area is a waste of money because you need to have the skills to use the broadband. So the two actually, they're sort of complements, and they're not substitutes. So just investing in broadband is not really going to get you very big return, particularly if you have low human capital in the first place. And that brings you exactly to the point that you made then, that how do you generate that sort of skill base in the more rural areas? And that's clearly an area where the institutes of technology, or as they're now going to be called technological universities, where they can play a particular role. And as John mentioned, for example, I think a cross-border collaboration between Letterkenny and across into Derry and University of Ulster seemed like an obvious thing to do. So the question then is, how do we do that? And again, that's something I think you mentioned yourself. There is now a Department of Higher Education, and maybe it is time that we would actually come up with a strategy. And I think this is a positive it's nothing to do with a particular political persuasion. I think in general, educational investment is a no regrets policy for wherever whatever community you come from. So we should really maximize on this. To some extent, though, we also have to realize that some of the institutes of technology and universities are also competing. And that's something that we do need to keep in mind. We are all looking for student numbers. And so that again, is something to bear in mind when we're thinking about how we deal with this. One thing that I think is notable, and last time I looked, I haven't looked for a while now, but we might have low numbers of students at universities crossing the border. It's much, much more pronounced for institutes of technology. And I did look at one point in Dundalk, and it was a very small number that crossed the border, and actually pretty much nobody crossing south to north. And that, I think, is quite striking and probably not very good. So that's where I leave it.
Deputy Smith earlier talked about how you can keep people who go on to third level in the area. And for Northern Ireland, the cap on numbers in third level is, the cap is binding. And what you have seen is an increasing proportion of people going to third level in Northern Ireland, but they are going to third level in Liverpool Brooks University. And it is surprising that they go to somewhere like Liverpool Brooks, where they're paying very high fees, where they could probably go to the Republic, but better still to reallocate resources in Northern Ireland to allow more students to study in Northern Ireland. And just on the ITs, the really important feature of the ITs was they've been tied into the local labour market. So if you have healthcare equipment in Galway and Mayo being a big issue, then GMIT prepares students for that in terms of certificate and diploma courses. And the tie-in with the local labour market and skill needs in the ITs has been something undervalued in the Republic, and the absence of something like that in Northern Ireland has been a problem. So one of the problems in the North is to reallocate resources to provide more places. In the Republic, we can do so much, and we could do a lot more in terms of cooperation, but Northern Ireland has to make choices for itself on this.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm just going to finish on, because I think we haven't mentioned COVID at all. And I think COVID has also put it up in terms of genomics across the island, and how we develop and progress genomics right across an all-island approach again to it. I mean, I think it's astounding that we have spent how much on a National Children's Hospital, and we don't have a dedicated genomics department or facility within that hospital. But again, I think it's something, I'm not sure if either of you have experience in that area or done any work specifically on that, but I think it's a whole area of work where there's opportunities again that have been presented by COVID. But I'll let one of my colleagues in. I've taken up enough time. Thanks.
You have one